Here's a system of 3 by 3 equations, 3 equations and 3 variables, and they want us to solve it by augmented matrices. Sometimes they'll call this reduced row echelon form. Basically what you're doing is you're going to convert this into an augmented matrix by pulling out all of the coefficients. That's called it's augmented because of that little bar right there. 2, 1, 2, 2, 4, 6, 1, 15. I'm just pulling out all the coefficients, putting them here. There's the coefficient matrix, and there's the resultant matrix, or the resultant side, and it's augmented because of that bar in the middle. Sometimes your calculator can do it, sometimes it'll ask you to do it by hand. I'm going to show you how to do it by hand. What I'm eventually going to want is, I want to change all of these things so that it looks like 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, and then whatever is over here are my 3 answers for X, Y, and Z. This is called reduced row echelon form right there. In order to do that, I need to go through a series of transformations following a couple rules similar to systems of equations. I can multiply and divide an entire row by something. So I could, for instance, take this entire row and divide it by 2 if I wanted to. Or I could take this row, multiply it by 3, and add it to this row to replace this row. So there's a couple rules like that, and the trick for this is to do it in an orderly way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first turn this into a 1, then I'm going to make these 0, then I'm going to turn this into a 1, make these 0, then I'm going to turn this into a 1 and make these 0. That's the best way to do it. So let's see if we can do that real quick right now. So the first step is I'm going to, and it takes a lot of space sometimes, I'm going to divide everything in this first row by 2. I'll get 1, 1, 7 halves, negative 1 half. Now I'm going to take the first row. I'm going to do a couple things at a time. I'm going to take the first row and multiply it by negative 1 and add it to the second row to give me my second row. So let's do that. I'm going to take this row, multiply it by negative 1, and add it to this row to get my new second row. So in other words, I'm just subtracting the top row from the second row to get my new second row. So this is going to be a 0. This is going to be negative 1. Remember, this was a 7 here. This is going to be negative 5. And this is going to be 3. I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom. Well, not the same thing. I'm going to multiply the first row. So I'm going to multiply row 1 by negative 2. I'm not really leaving much space to write in here. Right here, I'm going to multiply row 1 by negative 2 and add it to row 3 to make my new row 3. That's what I'm doing. So I'm kind of doing it in my head, but let's just go ahead and do the work. Here's row 1 times negative 2 is negative 4, negative 4, negative 14, and positive 2. This bottom row is 4, 6, 1, 15, so I'm adding them straight down. That's 0, that's negative 2, that's negative 13, and that's positive 17. So I've got 0, negative 2, negative 13, positive 17. Alright, so that was my first step. Notice that I'm turning that, I turned that first column into reduced row echelon form, which is what I was looking to do right there. Now I'm going to, I can do one of two things. Either I can move these 2 rows around, if that's easier, which it isn't actually, or I can multiply this middle row by something, but my goal is to turn this, change colors, my goal is to turn this into a 0. So how can I turn that into a 0? Pretty easily
multiply by 0.
I'm sorry, not by, I don't want to turn it into a 0, I want to turn it into a positive 1. See that? I want to turn that into a positive 1.
So multiply it by...
So multiply that entire
1.
middle row by...
Negative 1.
Negative 1. So this middle row is going to be 0. See why you wanted to turn that into a 0?
Yeah.
Because multiplying it doesn't change that 0. Positive 1, positive 5, negative 3. So I multiplied everything by negative 1. Now, this bottom row, I want to turn this into a 0. So I'm going to multiply this new row here, look at this new row now, by 2 and add it to this row to get my new third row. So multiplying that by 2, so my new row 2, I should write it like that, times 2 plus row 3 becomes my new row 3. So my new row 2 is going to be 0, 2, 10, negative 6. My row 3 was 0, negative 2, negative 13, 17. So when I add those together, I get 0, 0, negative 3, positive 11. So there's my new row, 0, 0, negative 3, positive 11. Now for my row 1, for my new row 1, I'm going to multiply my new row 2, which is right there again. I just erased it. I'm going to multiply my new row 2. Actually, I don't have to multiply by anything. I'm just going to add it straight to row 1 to get my new row 1. So I'm going to take row 2 and add it to row 1 to get my new row 1. So here's row 2, 0, 1, 5, 3. Row 1 is up here. It's 1, 1, 7 halves, negative 1 half. So when I add those together, I'll do the work underneath here. I get 1 still, which is a good thing because that needs to be a 1 still. Sorry, I'm so sorry. I should have multiplied it. It's negative row 2. So these should all be opposite sides. Negative, negative. That would have been a positive now because it was a negative there. Sorry about that. So this becomes 0. This becomes, let's see, 7 halves is 3 1/2 minus 5 is negative 3 halves. Negative 3 halves. And positive 3 minus 1 half is 6 halves, is 5 halves. This is where you have to kind of be careful with your math. So here's my new row. 1, 0, negative 3 halves, positive 5 halves. And again, you can see that this is a very tedious process. We're already 7.5 minutes in, and I'm only barely halfway done with it. Alright, the next thing I want to do, I'll change colors again, is I want to turn this one right here into a 1, so it looks like that. So I divide by negative 3. So my new bottom row looks like 0, 0, 1, negative 11 thirds, if I did everything right. Now I want to turn this into a 0 by taking this new row and multiplying it by, see, I turned it into a 1, so it's easy for me to get rid of that 5 there. I'm going to multiply it by negative 5. So this is going to be negative 5, and this is going to be positive 55 thirds. Boy, what a mess. 55 thirds, so this becomes 0, 1, 0. Those two didn't change because I have zeros here, so it didn't really affect anything. And this becomes minus 3, so this is again where it gets a little bit tricky. Multiplying it by negative 5, so this is minus 3. It's going to be 55 thirds, positive 55 thirds, minus 3, and 3 is the same as 9, negative 9 thirds. So 55 thirds minus 9 thirds, that's what, 46 thirds? Can I reduce that? 46 thirds. Does that reduce? 46, no, that doesn't reduce, so that's the answer for that. And this becomes 1, 0, and we can do that last process there. Sometimes you make a one single little mistake and it screws up everything, which has happened right here. I checked with my calculator and these are not the right answer. So what I did wrong, I believe, is somewhere right in here. I think that number's wrong. Because if I multiply this by negative 2, that will give me a 0. Negative 2 That'll give me a positive 2, not a negative 2. Multiply that by negative 2, that'll give me a negative, that's right. Negative 2. Oh, this one's wrong. Aha, much better. Multiply that by a negative 2, that becomes a positive 2. Oh, maybe that was right. Did I have 17 in there? So that should have been a positive 2. This is still the same. This one right here should have become multiply this by positive 2 instead. That's it right there. Positive 2, 0, positive 2, positive 2, negative 23. Positive 2 is 6. Oh, yeah. That becomes a 23. There we go. It was just a simple mistake that I made right there. And then this becomes a negative 1 now.
So the answer?
Which is much easier to do. So now if I want to get rid of this 5 and make it a 0, I multiply this by negative 5. So this would become a positive 5 that I'm adding that. So that'd be positive 2. And
1.
multiply this by 3 positive 3 halves to make this a 0. So multiply 1 positive 3 halves, so that becomes negative 3 halves. What's 5 halves minus 3 halves? Equals 2 halves, which equals 1. There are your 3 answers. And that's how you do that problem. So x equals 1, y equals 2, z equals negative 1. That's how you do. That's how you solve an augmented matrix with reduced row echelon form, and even taking you through and showing you the mistakes that you can very easily make. And if you're lucky enough and are careful enough with it, you might be able to go back and correct the mistakes instead of having to start all the way over. But much easier, just use your calculator and punch it in.